What you see there on the floor in the center aisle is a microphone that you can use to ask a question. If you don't have questions for us, we talk for a living, so it's not as though it's going to leave us with nothing to do. But if you do have questions, we'd love to have those questions, and they can prompt us as we think and talk about different matters. So we've had a number of presentations, total of 6. And we've kind of ranged over the terrain a bit, very philosophical, exposition of Scripture, kind of an exposition of our political and social environment and the challenges that we face, reflections on what it takes to live faithfully in this time. And a number of the comments that were made in the presentations have to do with just regular folks trying to be faithful wherever they find themselves. Sometimes people find themselves in companies that they loved working for, and then suddenly those companies have changed overnight and have now required them to do things that they never could have believed just a few years ago they would have been required to do. So there are some things that maybe you're dealing with in your own life that relate to these matters. So if you want, you can just form a line behind the microphone, so you don't have to wait for somebody to leave, in order to ask your question. Okay, I see there are lots of questions. Now, here they're all moving now. Okay, good. Great. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Justin. Thanks so much. The last talk kind of talked about what it meant, whether someone's intentionally being, wicked, whether they're a wolf, or whether they're a sheep in the sense that they don't quite understand what's going on. I'm wondering how you make that differentiation, because it's something I've thought about a lot, having went to school up in Seattle for a good 6 or 7 years, and seeing the people around me and the things that they support being so evil and the results that they create. So how do you determine whether someone's wicked and evil in supporting that, or whether they simply don't understand and it's more of a sheep sort of situation? Because that's something I've been trying to reconcile. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I'm very reticent to call someone a wolf. So if you ask me to name names right now, I probably wouldn't.
No, that's not what
I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm echoing the concern about and the difficulty, and I think a lot of it has to do with, I think I mentioned, wolves are false teachers. So it's not just like some person coming in your church and, if they're actively trying to undermine the doctrine of your church, then they've kind of positioned themselves as to be a teacher. So that would kind of maybe qualify them as an attempt at that. But I think it's the obstinacy when rebuked and provided clear teaching. And if they persist in that, then they've shifted over into a wolf status, and they're actively trying to lead others astray. And so.
Yeah. Now, when I heard your question, I thought you were maybe referring to just anyone you might know, whether or not they were just people who had been deceived, or whether they were actively promoting evil and calling it good.
That's kind of along the lines of what I was asking.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. I probably would be less likely to start using the wolf language, because it does seem to be referring to tied to false teachers that are actively trying to influence the church. Sure. So you could maybe make it in some sort of analogous way of how the culture is trying to catechize the church in some sense. But then I'd probably go more to the demonic in that regard, which is what I was talking about yesterday, and how the principalities and powers are actually trying to undermine God's truth and creation order.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a perspective on that as well. I absolutely believe that we can infer people's inward state from their outward actions. Okay. However, there's a trap, and this is what I often see happens on the internet. Someone will say, this pastor is doing this because of some motivation of their heart. Bad motive, or he's selling out, he's doing this. And the response is always some variation of, you can't see in my side of my heart. How do you know that guy? So they immediately turn the tables on you and say you're accusing someone of malign motives when you see that they've taken an action or made a statement with which you disagree. And that's just one of the gotcha traps they always do. So what I like to do is avoid critiquing people for what I would see as some motive. Like being a wolf is a motive. I point out, here's what they are doing. And I'll name names. One guy is Russell Moore. He's written art, he gave a speech, a very prominent speech, the first thing's Erasmus lecture, called Can the Religious Right Be Saved? So note the kind of double meaning of the word saved.
Yeah.
He's written op-eds in the New York Times, which you can just quote the way that he essentially questioned the salvation of anyone who voted for Trump. And I can just say, okay, objectively, here is the head of the Southern Baptist Convention's lobbying arm and public policy arm writing an op-ed in the New York Times, a secular publication, critiquing the people who are paying the tithes that are funding his salary and organization. He's trashing the people he's paid to represent, that they're paying to represent him. That's an objective fact.
Right.
And so I try to stick to the objective facts of what people are doing and avoid trying to impute their motivation for taking those actions, not because I don't think we can infer motive, but because that's the instant way they try to turn around. I notice this is very common, they try to turn the tables on you. So that's my little tip, is to try to avoid imputing motives to someone unless they've directly stated their motive.
Sure.
Okay. All right, next. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Daniel. I'm a member here at WPC. I had a question for James as well. Is it ever illegitimate, in your opinion, to use political power to restrain sin?
Yes.
Can you give some examples?
Well, you don't restrain every sin. I mean, I'm a Thomist here in the sense of you have to be prudent about, first of all, we're talking about public sins that undermine social order. And so you start there, so you're not talking about every private sin. And even Richard Hooker is really good on this too. So you differentiate between some public and private sins, and that's messy, but it is a fact in the tradition that there is some differentiation there.
An example would be murder.
Yeah, you don't murder. I mean, so let me, I didn't want to do this, but when Tim Keller had his thread about the Dobbs thing, right before Dobbs, it was unfortunate for him, the timing. He published a thread, he's like, why are we focusing so much on legislating abortion? He's like, we don't legislate against idolatry. And it's like, that's really bad logic. I'm sorry, it just is.
We do legislate against stealing.
Yeah, we legislate against stealing.
We legislate against all kinds of stuff.
You legislate, yeah. When people, there's a common thing, people say you can't legislate morality. I don't know what else you legislate. That's what you legislate. And so, I mean, obviously, there's some tax things or whatever, but they're tied to some morality. But yes, you don't legislate against every private vice, but those that are particularly socially destructive. And also, Thomas is really great. He even suggests, in certain places, you wouldn't even try to prohibit prostitution because it might cause more damage. So there's some nuance. Go look at the Christian tradition on how they differentiate between those types of those vices and which ones should be curbed. And so there are some limiting principles of but they're largely often tied to prudence, and they're tied to the distinction between public and private and whether or not it's socially destructive. So if somebody lies to their mom, I'm not going to penalize that unless it's some contract, but if somebody lies under oath, we penalize that. And so there's all sorts of different things there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the principle of prudence in what you legislate is one that you can get there directly from the scriptures. God did that. So Jesus says, when they come to him to ask about the divorce laws, Moses says this, and Jesus is he said that because of the hardness of your heart. So the regulation of divorce in Deuteronomy was God wisely accommodating the sinful hearts of his people. And Jesus' point was, but you took the accommodation and made it the standard. When the standard was, from the beginning, it was not so. And so that text when Jesus does that, he's offering us a way to grow up and think about law. You have to be really mature to think about, okay, so there's a created order. From the beginning, it was not so. And so that matters as a kind of ideal and something we should aim for. And yet we're in a fallen world with hardness of heart, and law needs to take that into account. But you don't want to lower the bar such that you take it as, then there's no standard, there's no ideal anymore. And so that's the kind of complexity, and James is right, that the Christian tradition has really done a lot of work to try to like think through the principles and applications of that, and we just aren't discipled into it, right? But it's really there. And so when he defines politics as the prudential pursuit of justice or prudential pursuit of the common good or something like that, all of that's important. Justice is a standard, but there's a prudence element that always has to get brought in as you're trying to apply in concrete circumstances. And the one way a rough and ready way to kind of differentiate is the closer that you get to high-handed violations of the Ten Commandments, the more that you ought to, like as Christians, you ought to speak more clearly. The farther out on the branches you get in terms of applications of those things or strategic sort of things, that's, hey, come, let's reason together. Let's talk about this. These are realms of prudence, and we can have different understandings. And so that's why the Keller thing on the abortion was so just, come on, man, really? Like this ought to be elementary for a pastor in your position. That's an obvious sort of thing to miss.
Yeah, like we don't legislate against private thoughts that are wrong about God.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's like these if you just have like idolatrous thoughts, yeah, we're not going to legislate it. If your idolatry is like sacrificing children to Moloch, yeah, we're going to legislate against that. Sorry, like that's just obvious.
Right.
So anyway.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Hi, Sid. So recently, I went on a road trip with a longtime friend. We had a history, and we went to Bible college together. He deconstructed and went radical left. And so we had some long conversations. A lot of facts were thrown around, and I realized partway through that the conversation we were having wasn't really about truth or facts so much as what is beautiful. And I realized I don't have the ability to have a conversation over how do you convince someone that, oh, this is good or this is beautiful. So do you guys have any advice for having those conversations of how to impart a sense of what is beautiful in someone who doesn't see the things that you see as beautiful?
Yeah, I think von Balthasar comes to mind on this point. He said something like, we knew Hitler was wrong because he was so ugly. So when we think about the relationship between truth, goodness, and beauty, they're in harmony with each other. So a person who may be physically unattractive can be beautiful because of their moral standing and their just generosity of heart and so forth. And other people who are physically beautiful can be really ugly because of their moral, sort of decadence. And that tends to come out in some of the conflicts or the discontinuities are striking when that comes about. But anyway, that's just one thought that came to my mind, and I'm not a speaker.
Yeah. So thinking about the particular context, I think one of the things I said in my talk was part of our labor as Christians is to get Nathan-like creative in how to confront sin. Okay? So Nathan knows David just did what he did and doubled and tripled down to cover it up. And now he's got to go, well, I got to go say something. Like that's the calling. And he could have just walked in and said, hey, sixth commandment, fifth, word, just start listing them off. You did it. And instead, he does this circuitous route where he tries to awaken. He knows David does have a moral sense. There is a law written on his heart. He's a creature made in God's image. He's in God's world, and he's in a society that at least gives lip service to the law of God. Okay, so he knows all of that, and so he says, "I need to awaken David's moral sensibility, and draw it out of him, and then turn it back around and say, you're the man." Right? So there's creativity that went into like, how do you get there, and involves a story and things like that. I think part of what we want to do in a conversation like that is attempt to awaken, you're talking about beauty, but I think the moral sense can also do it, because I think there is that relationship between truth, goodness, beauty. And so I would get super curious with a friend of mine and just start I would be asking questions more than offering opinions in that situation, and just saying, so do you think this is good? Do you think this is beautiful? And just trying to say, well, so what would you say is the idea? Just start like probing and trying to draw out that sort of thing. And then I would think creatively, prayerfully about then, what would I want to say? How could I draw out what's in there in order to then bring it to the foreground, maximize it, and then say, okay, where'd that come from? Turn it around, you're the man, however you do it. Does that make sense? So there's a kind of prayerful creativity that first has to draw something out of the friend, and in order to then let God work, right? And that's at the end of the day, when you might get to a place where you go, well, we're just in totally different places here in terms of what you think is beautiful and what I think is beautiful, what you think is good, and I do. And at that point, it's pray and preach. Like it's a matter of, but this is what God says. So there's times that this is what your story about, or the TGC thing. What could I have done? Nothing. But you could have just been bear witness. And sometimes that's all it required to do. This is the prophets are told in the Old Testament over and over again, right? Ezekiel, I got a job for you, right? And Ezekiel, oh, good. God's called me to do something. What is it? Okay, so there's this really hard-hearted people, like their forehead is like brass. I just need you to go tell them stuff, and they're not going to listen to you. Like I'm going to tell you up front, they're not gonna. Like they're totally going to blow you off completely. Good luck. And like that was, and Ezekiel had to go, that's my calling. Because, and we should be hopeful though, because sometimes hard-hearted people need to run into something as hard as their hearts. And is not my word like a fire and a hammer which shatters a rock? Right? That's what God says about his word. So Spurgeon got this great sermon where he's like, are you dealing with somebody who's got a hard heart? He's like, try the hammer. If it doesn't shatter,
Baxter has a lot of this stuff.
Hit it again. Yep. Hit it again.
Yep.
Hit it again. Is it still not shattered? Hit it again. And it's like, okay, and so what are you doing? You're testifying, you're bearing witness to reality with prayer that God would do.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like based on Joe's earlier talk too, is like reality's real. And I think one of the things that like oftentimes in like Reformed apologetics, we can forget that. And we can get too caught up in trying to convince them to see things a certain way or whatever, and just like start with the confidence that reality is real, bear witness to it, and have the long view, right? Like they might not come to see things your way in that conversation, but you don't know. One of my dreams is like we're going to sit in heaven, and we're going to, one of the things I think that might happen when we get to heaven, maybe, this is me speculating, the Bible says very little about heaven, and is you're going to see people that you met like once or twice or had conversation, and they're going to tell you later, 10 years down the road, that changed my life. And like, we're gonna celebrate, we're gonna praise before the throne of like, I can't believe God would use this little thing that I did. So that's one thing, believe in reality, present it. Related on beauty, I haven't thought a lot about beauty, but here's one thing I heard about beauty and that I've been profoundly affected by is, one, I think we just, besides arguing about beauty, we need to create beauty, wholesome beauty, that isn't propagandistic or fascistic, trying to tell everybody exactly what to think about it. But let's create beauty. And there's a story I heard by David Taylor, who's a great theologian of beauty, did his PhD at Duke. He's from Austin, which is where I'm from. And he shared this story about him and his wife going to this modern art show. And it was kind of wholesome. It wasn't crazy. Maybe those don't exist anymore. And so, but it was like these people, it's like they have the drapes and they, I don't know, go create like ninjas in them. But there's no words. And he got in the car with his wife later. And she said, what'd you think about it? And this guy's like a theologian of beauty. He's an aesthete, And he said, the only thing he could say was, it was so beautiful. It made me want to be a better man. And so let's create more beauty and see what happens.
Yeah, I would like to put in a plug for my newsletter at aaronrenn.com if you sign up for it. I have a lot of stuff there, but my most recent monthly newsletter, which is a guest authored by a guy named Benjamin Mabry, actually is on aesthetics. So if you go there and click the newsletter tab, the most recent one is on aesthetics. I think this is a big, important area, and it's one that the American Protestant tradition and the Reformed tradition is weak on, and probably is an error, candidly, in our thinking. The Catholic philosopher Charles Taylor, his book, A Secular Age, which is basically about how we got to now, basically. It is the most effective criticism of Protestantism I have ever read. And one of the ways that he discusses Calvinism and kind of Reformed thinking in general, he uses a term called excarnation, which is the idea that it's essentially the physical has been devalued. The rituals and all of what the Catholic Church had, in terms of the physical motions and things, the Protestantism got rid of all of that. It got rid of all the ornamentations in the church. It got rid of that. And Christianity is reduced to a set of propositions that you believe in your head and a state of inward dispositions in your heart. But your body plays very little role in it. And I think that is something that we have missed. And we should always take the log out of our own eye. And so I think that we are very weak on aesthetics. And if you look at the what's going on in England with the king and all that stuff coming out, the aesthetic pageantry of it is very powerful. But America was basically a product of the dissenter Protestant traditions, kind of very low church, and we see that in the evangelical world. Very poor aesthetics across the board in our architecture of our buildings, in the music that we produce. Everything about it is poor. And that's telling us something is wrong. Now, I don't believe that physical appearance and I don't believe the true, the good, and the beautiful are identical in our world, and that outward beauty necessarily reflects inward. We know from Isaiah 53, Jesus was not a spectacularly beautiful person. We know that the devil clothes himself as an angel of light. Speaking of Hitler, Leni Riefenstahl's film, Triumph of the Will, which was a Nazi propaganda film filmed at the Nuremberg rally, extremely profoundly beautiful and influential piece of film. If you've ever seen the medal scene at the end of Star Wars, it was taken directly from Triumph of the Will, but yet in the service of evil. So we can't just say that the external beauty of something reflects its inward moral worth, but nevertheless, that is important. One of the things you'll notice is that the Mormons are exceptional at aesthetics. Virtually every high-profile mommy blogger, Instagrammer is Mormon. And there's some article, you could probably Google it, I have it filed away somewhere, where this woman who's an atheist, non-religious, is like, why am I so addicted to Mormon mommy bloggers? Why am I coming into that? Yeah, speaking of the Portland area, Kinfolk magazine, for those of you who know Kinfolk, was super influential aesthetically, created an entire aesthetic category, was founded in Portland by Mormons, people who were Mormon. And so I think, I do think that aesthetics trigger people in profoundly powerful ways, and it sort of bypasses all of their filters. And there's a reason why we're constantly being told to approve of and call the ugly beautiful. That's why they put the overweight swimsuit model on the cover of Sports Illustrated and say, this is beautiful. That's why Victoria's Secret has replaced their models with these kind of whatever's on there now. It's why they take all these obviously ugly, perverse things in many cases and demand that we call them beautiful. And yet, if you go to Twitter and you post some picture of some woman in a dress with long hair, beautiful, running through a wheat field with her 17 kids, they get triggered by that. That's white supremacy, or that's this, and that's that. And that aesthetic power that comes from that, it's something that I think that is one of the weaknesses of our culture, is that it demands that we worship ugly things and that we approve of very ugly things. And since aesthetics are an objective category as well, they're not just subjective, they're objective. And their subjectivity is out of true with our inner sense and with our biological reactions to what is beautiful. And so I think, that's one of the things when I say, when we create an environment in which our churches have, lots of people getting married with intact families and lots of kids and productive households, starting businesses and being pillars of our community, that bypasses the filter. We know. People get triggered by it. They don't always like it. You walk around Manhattan with a bunch of kids and you might get triggered, but that's very powerful. H.L. Mencken wrote an essay. It's actually about architecture in suburban Pittsburgh. It's a great essay. You can find it online, called The Libido for the Ugly. And that is our culture. It is one that has a libido for the ugly, and we need to correct our own aesthetic deficiencies so that that is a profound weapon, I think, that we have to get better at. Now, will that solve your problem with your conversation? No, probably not. But one of the problems in that discussion could very well be that here's someone who understands at a certain level something is not beautiful, but wants to believe that it's beautiful. And again, aesthetics and beauty bypass the filters. And that's why, and they can't be denied because it's primal. Just like, when you see, when a woman sees Brad Pitt or Leonardo DiCaprio or something like one of these, hot, hunky guys, it's a primal reaction. When a man sees a smoking hot woman, it's just primal and it bypasses the filters. And that's why we have to leverage that, I think, as well. And when you see the world attack beauty and praise ugliness, that is part of that moral discrediting because it's a reality that can't be denied.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and my question's actually for Aaron. In one of your presentations, you were talking about giving some advice for how we should approach talking to like the grillers.
Yeah.
And one of the things you used the example of in our criticism that it's better to do things like criticize, say, the teachers union rather than like the local government school. Because of the perspective that grillers have on their community, and I guess my question was, though it seems to me that criticizing local institutions is actually kind of exactly the thing that we need to be doing, because it's the local institutions are the things that are actually, well, like in the case of the government schools, it's like that's what's actually catechizing children. It's not the teachers union that's grooming children, it's actually the government schools. And so I guess I wanted to ask a little bit about, so how do we navigate if the thing that actually needs to change in our communities or the local institutions, how do we sort of navigate that kind of discrepancy there that I'm articulating? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to local institutions, the question is not whether you should attack them or defend them, the question is what is going to be most tactically effective in making those institutions do the right thing and be competent. And that's going to vary from place to place. And so that's the real question. So a lot of people, let's just say, we know that schools are a problem. They are, even in conservative areas. So what are you going to do about that? Well, you can mobilize political campaigns to take over the school board. And then if you take over the school board, then you can conceivably fire the superintendent, start making these changes. But the key is, like, how many people have successfully taken over their school board? There's been some people who've won elections recently, but, is that going to be an effective strategy? So to me, the question is, what's going to be effective? Not, I'm not wedded to any particular strategy per se, as long as it's in conformance with God's law. But we got to act about effectiveness is important. It's like, who said this thing about we're called to be faithful, not effective? Why can't we be both? And so I just say, okay, what's the local, I don't know what the local school situation is here. Let's say it's bad. What are you going to do about it that's going to work? And I think the typical conservative response is to get on talk radio and get indignant and start making screeds about something. And not to say that that's anything wrong about that. That may all be true. But objectively, over the last 20, 30 years, it hasn't worked. That strategy has not actually worked. So we need to think about, in the context where we are, what institutions can we realistically affect, and what's the best way to do that? And it may be, in many cases, that in most places, I would put the schools in the too hard pile. And I would say, we need to build off-ramps from the schools, homeschooling, Christian schools, everything we could do, that it's more fruitful to build off-ramps than to try to reform the schools. I essentially think the schools are all but unreformable for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
One, it's very difficult to win school board elections. Number two, even if you took over the entire professional class of people who are certified to be teachers, principals, superintendents, are people who are ideologically indoctrinated in line with the tenets of their profession, which are not ours. There's also tremendous amount of federal and state regulations that generally mandate, right, much of what is going on. And, like this social and emotional learning, a lot of that is being promoted by state departments of education. So once you start getting in and saying, now that we've elected the school board, how are we gonna reform this thing? It's incredibly difficult. We had Donald Trump as president. Was he able to reform even one bureaucratic agency? No, right? And so it's really, really, really hard. Now, if you want to take it on, I would say go for it. I mean, if you think it's there, I just say we need to be thinking about what will work. And objectively, the conservative culture war strategies failed. They didn't work because the left won. And so I think we ought to be thinking a little bit different in our strategy. So I would never, if somebody felt called to be confrontational on the school, or you felt like that would be effective, I would never discourage that. I would just say, but I think that's what I would say effectiveness. Like I talked about open carry earlier. I think there are places where open carry probably works, like North Idaho. Highly, highly conservative, big gun culture, having a lot of people open carrying in downtown Coeur d'Alene probably discourages the casual blue stater who might want to move to that town and become a progressive there.
That's why they do it, though.
That's probably why they do it. So open carry in that environment in North Idaho probably works. So it depends on the context of where you are. So I think very clearly about this. Maybe with your school board, it's populated by kind of normies, and you got to figure out how to reach them. So again, my point is just, it's got to be about what works. It's got to be about what's effective, what's tactically effective needs to be our focus. I think our principles ought to be on things like God's law, sort of goodness, truth, beauty, that sort of stuff. But in terms of it's like the Bible doesn't tell you how to fry an egg. It doesn't tell you how to fix, the fill valve on your toilet. There's a lot of things. There's nothing. In those cases, it's about what works, and so that's what I put in most of these institutional things.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, I am a recovering third way guy, and so thank you for this conference, and I'm loving it. My question is...
You're not alone, brother. You've got lots of third way people that are
praise the Lord.
here with you.
Yeah, all right. The way that we are talking about wolves and the way we are talking to our people about wolves and talking to wolves, what does gentleness mean in 2 Timothy 2:25?
That's a good question. So this is part of what James is getting at, I think, when he's quoting that and saying that has to stay, but then quoting the other stuff that Paul said, Jesus said, is to say whatever you think gentleness means, it needs to accommodate that. So you just got to start there as a baseline. Because I read an article recently where someone was criticizing sort of the serrated edge satire kind of stuff, and they implied, I say implied because it seemed like they were actually saying it more outright, but don't know motives. So they implied that sort of Jesus and John the Baptist got a pass on that sort of stuff, and you're not Jesus, and so you don't get the pass. Which I just thought was a crazy way to think.
What would Jesus do? I remember that being a real popular
that one
thing.
time I think that was a thing. So start with just whatever gentleness means. For Paul to say it, it means you can also say, may they go the whole way and castrate themselves. Okay? So that's included. And so in 2 Timothy, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, able to teach, patiently enduring evil. And it's instructing people who he views as captive. Does that make sense? So the gentleness is targeted at, I'm trying to win this person. But part of what you might be doing in order to win that person is speaking harshly about the other person who's trying to win them or keep them. Okay, and this is, I think, when you think about the sort of rhetoric of the New Testament, Paul is often writing to churches that have been captivated by false teachers, and he's harsh with the wolves because he's being gentle with the sheep. Like so the gentleness, so in Galatians is a great example of this, where that's where he does the go castrate yourselves. But he's like, you foolish, he still calls them, you foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you? But there's a kind of fatherly appeal that I would put in that rubric of gentleness that's a sort of like, how could you guys? Do you remember when I was there and I was among you and now you're going here, you're going back? Don't go there. And he blasts those guys. And so gentleness always has like a target. Who are you being gentle with? And so I don't think that the whatever gentleness means is a blanket. Every person you encounter demands gentleness in the same way, right? I don't know, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I do think the distinction between teachers and then just lay persons is important here. Like who bewitched you, right? Like that's a pastoral tone towards those who are being bewitched. And he's not as focused as much, like on the Judaizers, he's like, you're portraying a false gospel and like you need to be accursed, right? I mean, and so, and I think that should inform, we should have a different level of compassion towards those who are being tricked by the false teaching, and have a higher bar and therefore a higher judgment on those who are teachers. James says, like, not many of you should wish to be teachers because you're going to be held to a higher account. And so holding them to a higher account is being firm with them when they're leading the people astray. And one of the things I would say too, like Bill Joe made me think of this when he was talking, is like, this also relates not just like false teachers in the church, but also like some of our debates on social media or otherwise. It's like, sometimes when you're debating someone who's actively trying to undermine God's truth and affect other people, when you're debating them, people often will they'll win some people, but like, oh, you're never going to persuade them being that way. Like, I'm not oftentimes trying to persuade them. I'm trying to expose folly for the onlookers. Because those are the people who can be won oftentimes. They're less hardened. The one who's trying to propagate these truths, they're hardened, and you're going to speak firmly with them, and I hope that they would repent and come back, and I'll leave open that opportunity. But oftentimes, even strategically, how you're debating some issues in some of the cultural realms that we inhabit, be thinking about how, and often that means you still need to have the moral high ground. Like, don't be a jerk. I am not ever advocating for being a jerk for Jesus. Like, even in those debates, you need to still show yourself to be a reasonable, like, person who's trying to win over people, but the people you're often trying to win over are the people who are watching. And that requires you still need to have the moral high ground, like Aaron talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a dimension to this that's seldom noted. It's really not about that guy you're talking to. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Kurt. Thank you guys for all your thinking and writing and speaking, articulating all this for us. I think it's really important. I'm just a layman. So just a few comments that will lead to a question, I promise. It was shocking to hear, Aaron last night saying after almost a decade into the negative world, there isn't a strategy that we've really agreed upon yet. And you did mention there's the Benedict option, which might be some sort of political piety 2.0. I think there is kind of emerging, or has emerged, I think what's being called the Boniface option, like Moscow. I think there's even a book maybe coming out soon in Canon Press about that. So that might be maybe Cultural Warrior 2.0 or something like that. So I guess, ironically, is there a third way that, I think
Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
So, yeah, so I think maybe
I just like to note that I am currently sitting in the middle
yeah.
between the
I'll get-
extremes on this side and the extremes on that side.
Which leads to my question. So I think Presbyterians would maybe lean more towards the Boniface option, Baptists to the Benedict option for various reasons in their, theology and whatnot. But so do you guys have any? Are you formulating? Is there anything in the hopper? Who's going to write the next American Reformer article to solve all this for us, and why is it going to be Joe Rigney?
Yes. Because I'm sitting in the middle.
Let me say a few. Besides a strategy, I don't think a good strategy. So Aaron could speak to this. I don't think a great strategy has solidified and come to the fore. I think we're still in the exploration stage about what that means. And so I think there needs to be space. I think what we're trying to do is like, hey, let's carve out the space for the conversation. And this is one of the things. But I've often tried to mention people that I look up to of doing some of the stuff that I admire and think responding well. Joe is one of them. I've often told people about what Joe is doing. Josh Howerton's a great guy to follow on Twitter. He's really great at this stuff. Kevin DeYoung is one of the guys in the old guard that's still worth listening to. He's really trying to navigate this space. Cardinal Sarah, I mentioned. I think there's people like we need to start, and as you find them, flag them to others. Like, hey, these are courageous people who aren't losing their character, who seem to know what time it is, but they don't then go full realpolitik. And so as we find those people, continue to flag them so that we can all learn from them and try to figure this out together. So I'll just say that very briefly.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts is one, I don't know that there's going to be a strategy. I think that's part of the, living in a big country with lots of people, lots of different contexts, where negative world is sort of unevenly distributed, right? So it's going to look different in certain urban centers, as Aaron noted, just the things change fast. All of a sudden, you can have a great strategy, and everybody's got a strategy to get punched in the face, until plans are great, and then they run into reality, and sometimes reality runs into you, and so part of it, I think, is being formed into certain kind of people. So commending really basic stuff. So you like Book of Acts, right? They're sitting there, they think, Jesus just rose from the dead. They're waiting because he told them to wait, and they're just sitting there. Spirit falls, and then it's like, and everybody's rushing, and it's just chaos. And what does Peter do? He just gets up and preaches a sermon, right? And he's like, and it's a bold sermon. It's like, you guys killed Jesus. God raised him from the dead, fulfilling the promises of the fathers. You need to, and what must we do? Repent and be baptized. And then they got 3,000 people to figure it out. And it looks different as it sort of works its way through the Roman Empire from there. But the common thing that you notice in the book of Acts is you have resilient communities that take care of each other, right? So thick communities where people know each other and are looking after each other's needs. And that's a really important thing because that serves boldness at a very practical level. I think this is part of the challenge is that it's hard to be bold when your paycheck depends on not being bold. Right? And so there's a way in which knowing I've got a people who will take care of me, therefore, when they say, hey, will you hang this little flag up this month? If I got people, then you'll be able to say, can't do it, I'm sorry. That's not, and so thick communities that produce a kind of boldness that Spirit rots, that Spirit falls, and boldness in the book of Acts is courage and clarity about Jesus and sin. That's what it is. So you just read through the book of Acts sermons, and you'll see the way that they talk about you killed Jesus, God raised him from the dead. You killed Jesus, he sent us to turn every one of you from your wickedness, and it's clarity about sin, and then it's clarity about who Jesus is and how you get washed away. So it's resilient communities, bold preaching, but it's going to look different depending on rural, urban, suburban, and so forth. And so it's really experimentation at this point to try to navigate it, not top-down manifesto that we've all figured out.
I agree.
I do have a couple of thoughts I'd like to share. One is I think that your talk on the Tao is significant in this respect. In the first century, there was a lot of sexual perversity, but there wasn't the kind of ideological insanity, blindness that we see today. And people who make false equivalencies between that environment and ours are missing a huge point. We're on the side of reality. We need to just say we are on the side of reality and we have a long view. This is not about winning today. This is about the long view. I've seen guys like you come and go, and I'm old enough to say that, and I can actually see a lot of people come and go. And this stuff just can't sustain itself. And I think that's actually part of that plays into the sort of rabid character of this stuff, is they know it too. The thing that Solzhenitsyn really drove home with his writing was that the reason why the Soviets were so intent on controlling the conversation is just one word of truth brings it all down. So if we have the long view and we're committed to reality, which means we're committed to productive households, meaning pro-natal in character, we believe in children, we celebrate when they come into the world, we create environments in which those children are able to thrive. And then, you got to have leadership who are willing to name the demons that we're dealing with. I've interacted with a number of church leaders over the last, say, 5 years who just cannot get there. One of the reasons I'm here as the elders I'm working with here can. So you can find a place where we're actually able to talk about this stuff, not pretend that it doesn't matter or even exist. So those are some of my thoughts.
One of the things we did at my church a couple of years ago, so I'm a pastor and professor, so I do think more about this because of my professorial vocation. I'm reading lots of stuff. But we did a little men's retreat where we went and we talked about, we took some of Chris's stuff and talked about productive households and the challenges of modern technoculture and transience and things like that, because we're in an urban church, lots of people coming and going. But the whole point was, hey, we just want to expose you to the problem. And then one of the things I said in that talk was, the pastors of this church are not going to figure this out for you. Like, I will. My job here as the pastor is I'm going to open this book and I'm going to tell you what God says. But like, I'm putting the burden on, especially this was a men's retreat, especially the men here. You guys are going to, here's what God says. Here's some of the things that are going on in the world. Here's the picture. And then there's a lot of creativity in this room. You guys are really competent people, right? Figure this out. Like, figure out, try stuff, experiment, go. Like, this is a calling, go do it. But if you're going to sit that, so like, and I'm not saying this to you like in a this isn't a rebuke. What I'm saying is there does need to be, so there's specific callings on public leaders. Like, you look in the book of Acts, they're the ones getting hauled before the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they're the ones who are having to be bold and we must obey God, not men. And then there's just a lot of common people, and what's their job? To pray, to love one another, and to work with their hands and not be idle and live quiet lives and all that sort of stuff. Does that make sense? And so it's like, figure out what that is and then band together, right? That's like, there's hey, we're doing this together. We're raising our families together as a way of building that kind of resiliency. But I think one of the modern sort of temptations is to wait for someone else to kind of tell you. Does that make sense? Like, I feel that. I'm like, you're like, so who's going to write the book? I'm like, yeah, who is it? Where's that book? Because I would really like to know, like, how to do this, right? And it's like, oh, I guess no one's going to figure it out for me. I'm just going to I live in South Minneapolis. What does it look like to have a productive household with 13, 11, and a 4-year-old in my context? So I guess we've got to go figure it out.
Yeah, I want to say I totally agree with that it's not the pastor's job to figure out the answer to every problem, and lay leaders need to step up and provide leadership in their domain. I am very unlike these guys in that I'm not a pastor and I'm not a theologian. I'm a management consultant. And the Three Worlds framework is a product of my management consulting expertise. And so we've got a lot of people who are world-class in their fields, and they need to be the ones figuring out in their domains how to do it. I want to push back on one thing, or really clarify one thing about some of this that I think is important. Yes, I believe we are on the side of reality. I prefer to say we're on the side of truth. The nuance is that when we say we're on the side of reality, I think there's an implicit thought process that all we have to do is stand back and wait for the system to collapse. But in the stock market, if you think a stock is overvalued, you sell it. It's called selling short, which means you're betting on it to go down instead of up. And you make money if it goes down, and you lose money if it goes up. And if you buy a stock hoping it goes up, the most you can lose is all your money. Whereas in a short selling, you can actually lose more than all the money you put in. And there's a saying there about short selling that says the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. And even if the market finally corrects, you may be bankrupt, right, when it happens. And, the Soviet Union took about, 70 years to fall apart? And so I want to be careful that we don't fall into a passive disposition as a result of thinking that we can just align ourselves with the truth and just wait for the market. You always hear about how the marketplace will discipline companies that aren't effective and productive and profit maximization and all of that. And well, we see that it doesn't actually work that way. That you can embrace non-market objectives like ESG or DEI, and you're actually rewarded, not punished by the market. I've been hearing since the 1980s that the debt is unsustainable. How long have we been saying the federal debt's unsustainable? What are we up to now, 30 trillion in debt, something like that? If you'd told us, in 1992, that we would have $30 trillion in debt, people would have thought the country collapsed. Well, it turned out the debt was sustainable. And so I think that there's a lot of ruin in a nation, as Adam Smith said. And therefore, if we want this system to change, we absolutely have to do something. Okay? That's what I say. That's why I like the insurgency metaphor, because insurgents are actually trying to overthrow the establishment oppressive foreign regime. And so we need to be thinking, I think, in the same way that I think we want to align ourselves with the truth, but we can't allow that to let us to become passive. We need to be thinking actively about how we delegitimize this system.
All right, good stuff.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Gilead Rose. I appreciate everything you guys have said, really. I did want to ask a couple related questions. Generally, the first one is more general in nature. And Aaron, you talked about how most of us are not called to direct conflict and should avoid it in many cases. And you use the example of open carry. And Joe, you mentioned not repeating lies, and you used the example of pronouns. And James, you were kind of in the middle. You talked a lot in your most recent time, obviously about the winsomeness and when and how not to and to. So generally speaking, obviously these are different principles, and I don't see them as contradictory by any means. But I was wondering if each of you could share maybe one additional culturally relevant example of these things to help inform our discernment on how to apply these. And then more specifically, I am unfortunately a federal employee, and I'm working to remedy that, but it's very likely that I will show up for a shift at work and be sent to gender identity sensitivity training at any point. Like literally.
Education camp, that's what they used to call it.
Yeah. And I'm not worried about what will happen if I am less than compliant. But I would specifically like advice on how to handle that situation. Not worried about being fired. I have a job lined up, but I don't want to be too directly conflicting, and I want it to be a net good rather than an unfortunate representation of Christianity.
So another example, I don't have another one off the top of my head other than, whether it's, hey, put the rainbow flag up. It's the sexual revolution sort of stuff is where the signaling comes. I guess one would be on some of the more woke systemic racism, critical race theory kind of thing. One observation there that I didn't get to in my talk, but I think is important, is the way that it's an observation from a friend of mine, Josh Dawes, it's also a good follow, that the CRT stuff, the pervasiveness of that, and the sexual revolution go hand in hand for a very real reason, and it has to do with guilt. And so it's lead with the systemic racism piece and the pervasive, indelible white supremacy that you can't get away from, in order to foster in people a certain kind of guilt, because everything's read through oppressor, oppressed, and you're oppressor, you're oppressor, you're oppressed. And then I think this feeds into a lot of the transgender craze among young girls especially, because you've been conditioned to think you're a bad person, you're a bad person, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty. And then all of a sudden, here comes the evangelist, the sexual Pharisee, who says, and there's a way out. Because who's more oppressed than a sexual minority? And so if you all of a sudden are a boy trapped in a girl's body, and if you maim yourself, you go from oppressor to oppressed like that, and you're vindicated. Not only are you vindicated, but you're now a dispenser of justice. You're now in the arbitrator's seat. And that's a really attractive thing. So does that make sense? Like there's a 1-2 punch there of like soften up by creating guilt, and then It's a law gospel kind of movement. Does that make sense? Like it's a really ugly parody of that kind of thing. And so I think that's just another dimension of this whole situation that we live in to be mindful of, is that there are ways to acknowledge the gross racial evils in our country historically and even lingering consequences of those that don't involve that ongoing perpetuation of unabsolvable guilt or guilt that can only be absolved by mutilation and getting out of it. So that was just another angle in the moment that we live in.
Yeah, I've been working a lot with Hannah Arendt and the origins of totalitarianism, and one of the things she notes is that in totalitarian regimes, you move from subjective guilt to objective guilt. And what she means is that subjective guilt is guilt that you actually deserve because you did something. You're a subject that acted in a way that deserves condemnation. Objective guilt doesn't imply you've done anything. It's a category of person that must be eliminated. So in the Soviet Union, what you had were, you had the proletariat, but then you had the bourgeoisie and various expressions of the capitalists and their outlook. The kulaks, other groups, just one after another, were identified as being objectively wrong, except objectively guilty. And nobody claimed that they'd actually done anything. They just belonged to a category that had to be eliminated. In Nazi Germany, obviously, it was the Jews, but the thing that folks don't know is that there was a list. There were other groups that were next. The final solution wasn't final. The Poles were next. Then the Slavs. And then people with birth defects in Germany who were German. They were going to be eliminated, sterilized, killed. So why? What did they do? They didn't do anything. That's not the point. Likewise, in the situation we find ourselves in, there are certain categories that are just objectively guilty. I embody the cross-sectionality of every one of them. Now, this is the crazy thing. A lot of us think, well, it's just insane. They can't go that far. How will they run anything? They will go that far. This is another thing that Hannah Arendt brings out, the anti-utilitarian character of this. It's insane. They will run things into the ground, knowingly, for their quest to be pure. So the fact that you're indispensable at work doesn't matter.
I keep coming back to social media, which I think is where a lot of this stuff takes place. I mean, I think most people should say a lot less on social media about controversial political or social issues. And perhaps you would say I'm a hypocrite because I do comment on some of these issues, but look at my Twitter feed and go scroll through like a month of my Twitter feed, and you will actually see that there are a huge number of issues that I never talk about. Many of the most controversial issues in our society, I essentially rarely opine upon, and typically only obliquely, because...
Instead, you set up an organization to undermine those.
Yeah. So
I will say, I do follow, if you don't follow Aaron on Twitter, it is a very boring Twitter feed.
Yeah.
Lots of really...
Joe and I are here for you.
Lots of really weird stuff about like Indianapolis, city politics and stuff like that. And I'm
My
like,
comment
why
was
is this
actually
here?
not intended to be facetious. In other words, what Aaron is saying is not roll over.
Yeah, right.
What Aaron's saying is try this.
Strategic.
I'm picking my battles. I say I want to stay in my lane, and so my lane is what I like to talk about is the call it the future of the church, and then I was very much wrote on kind of men's issues, so call it Jordan Peterson type stuff. So I write about those in great detail, and I take in some cases cancelable stands on some of those issues, but I don't feel the need to weigh in on everything that's going out there. And again, I sometimes do, I made a comment about Biden's speech. I posted that blood red photo. I just said it was strong Palpatine energy. And so I do that occasionally, but most of the time, I am not even criticizing anybody. I criticize Republicans way more than I criticize Democrats, just because I'm particularly offended at the Republican Party in Indiana where I live. I think they're terrible. But I really feel like just don't feel like every day there's a big controversy about something, don't weigh in. Keep your mouth shut unless you have to speak up on something and think, what's my issue? Why am I speaking up on this? So I think a lot of people would be better off not being on social media at all or using it just to post pictures of their dog. I really think getting involved in political discussions on Twitter and Instagram, and again, I mean, look, we all make exceptions. Like I say, don't crack jokes on Twitter. I rarely ever try to make a joke on Twitter because this is the thing that gets, the journalists grab it, they take it out of context. They're just ready to devour you. The wolves are there, ready to devour you. And so I think we need to channel Nassim Taleb and his concept of anti-fragility, things that actually get stronger when they're attacked or stronger when they come into resistance. One of the ways that he says that you become anti-fragile is when you use what's called a barbell strategy. And the barbell is the two extremes. On the one extreme, you play it extremely safe. You're trying to de-risk your life as much as possible. On the other end, you're taking a few well-placed, high-risk bets. Maybe you start a business or something over here. But you're only taking risks in parts of your life, and you're trying to de-risk in other parts of your life. So I really feel around de-risking your life as much as possible. Okay, let's be financially leaner. Let's have more savings. Let's avoid talking on social media. And that creates margin and say, well, where do I want to take my bets? Where do I want to take my shots there? The other thing that I really think, talk about the theology of getting fired from your job. There's another one that I want to put a challenge out to you guys, or a request for a theology research. And the theology of Kettman, or this idea of when it is appropriate to lie, which the Bible clearly states that it is a good thing to tell untruths to corrupt regimes at times. The most classic case is the Hebrew midwives who lied to the Pharaoh about, well, they just have the babies before we get there, but they're refusing to kill the babies, right? So everybody knows that if the Gestapo comes to your house and say, where are the Jews at? You don't say, oh, they're up in the attic. What? So those are extreme cases, but I think we need to understand, I think it's completely appropriate in some circumstances to say things that actually are not factually accurate to tyrannical regimes. So what those parameters are, I don't know theologically. That's why I'm asking these guys to come up with that.
Great, James. Good luck. Political theology, that's you, man.
But I think that's something, I think we are going to be able, I think it is legitimate to use strategic deception in many cases. The Hebrew spies going into the promised land didn't wear a I'm a spy t-shirt as they were walking around, right? And so there's like a lot of things that we need to get more, that's a to-do area for us there, I think.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I mean, I agree with a lot of this, and I think, like your situation as an example, pick your battles, like don't go out of your way to be adversarial, but if things are pressed upon you, and you don't feel like it's going against conscience or against God's law or something like that, then consider not making a big deal, but also maybe sometimes press their hand. Like try to offer an option of like, hey, would I be able to be exempt from something or whatever? So I often think about like how to press the oppressor's hand to put me in a situation rather than me making the decision from the outset. And then the other thing, the resilient community thing is really important here too. It's like that a lot more energy needs to be devoted to that than picking battles on social media, right? Like we need to have communities, if something is imposed upon us that really disrupts our life, that our life is, we're not completely terrified by that. And we shouldn't be, the church shouldn't be. I mean, the book of Acts, right? Like nobody had needs that didn't get met, right, in the church. And we easily can do that. I mean, so it sounds like you got something.
I just, a comparable scenario, just to what you just said. We had a situation in our church where The gal was working for like a marketing PR thing, and they had different clients come in. And at some point, and this was actually, Christians ran the company. She was just one of the, people who had an individual project. And the local Pride Parade people wanted to hire the company. And so they sent it to her desk, and she's at our church, and she's like, I can't do this. So she comes, talks to us. We have to help shepherd her, and we're like, yeah, you can't make that look beautiful. That would be lying. Okay, so don't make ugly things beautiful. That don't tell lies. And so she was like, get it. So what should I do? How should I handle it? And the way we worked it out was a way of kind of attempting a compromise and saying, hey, could you give this to that guy? Because he doesn't have the same kind of he's not a Christian or whatever. Just let him do this project, and I'll work on a different one. And so she tried to give them kind of an out, and she was a good, faithful, no one's indispensable, right? Like they would rather take the business and get rid of you. And so that's what they did. They ended up firing her because they did so as like how could you do this to us? And that she was in the wrong and all that kind of stuff. But she at least attempted to kind of give them a way out. And I think there's like a biblical, like another.
It's a peacemaker, yeah.
Yeah, there's a parallel in the book of Acts. But Acts is really good on some of this, like just thinking about how they did it as a kind of model. So when Paul's coming back to Jerusalem and he knows he's going to get arrested, he comes back, and then the other apostles come to him and say, hey, everybody's super worked up about you because they think that all of these things, like you hate Moses and you hate the temple and you hate all these things. So, hey, we got some guys who are going to go do a ritual thing at the temple. Would you go with them, pay for it, be involved in it, so like everybody sees that like you're a good Jew? And Paul's like, sure. And like part of the lesson is there's like he didn't come back guns blazing. He was I'll try to play nice. I'll try to smooth things over. And he goes in there, and then like a riot breaks out because he's there, right? Like so like he tried though. Like the point was like he was trying to avoid the confrontation, and then like the riot breaks out, and he gets arrested because that's what you do. And the guy's getting beat up by the mob. Is like the police come and arrest that guy. And so they did. They pulled him out, and then he's like, hey, can I have the mic? And so he saw opportunity. So it was like he didn't want a conflict, but when the conflict came, he was like, opportunity. And so I'm going to have it. This is an opportunity. And he gives a really winsome sermon.
But the only thing I would add to that is I'm often speaking to pastors because I want pastors to empathize with your situation. Because like one of the things that frustrates me a lot about a lot of this is like pastors are often sometimes shielded from the dilemmas that you're facing. Right. And it makes me angry. Right. Because I know like this is difficult for you, and so often when I'm talking, I'm like, pastors know what this guy's dealing with. Anyway.
Thanks a lot, Elliot. So you should probably keep it short. Do you have one more or two more?
You kind of answered my question already.
Okay. All right, great.
The American love of liberty has brought us many good things. Brought us Ulysses, the publication of which was once prohibited. How do you negotiate this love with a commitment to what Sohrab Ahmari called a public square ordered toward the common good and ultimately the highest good? In other words, do you see yourself as critics of a dead consensus? That's my question.
So are you asking us to resolve the post-liberal conversation here? Yeah. I mean, I probably engage that conversation the most here, but it's a total mess. I mean, the common good is a Christian category. I mean, it's more developed in Catholic thought. Joe and I were talking about this recently. It's harder to find Protestants really developing a full theory of it. I mean, you can get some in Althusius and other places, but it's really not as fully developed as it is in Catholic thought. So it's a little bit more of a Catholic thing, but it is a Christian thing. And so let me just prep. We're not going to resolve your question here, but so your question is basically how do we resolve the tension between the common good and liberty? Maybe I'll let Joe speak on that.
Yeah, so here's two categories that I have in my head. This is from our friend Brad Littlejohn, who's done a lot of thinking on this sort of stuff. And one of the things he helped me see about the liberty question is that it has to do with navigating two poles. One is the pole of individual liberty, and one is the pole of corporate liberty, which is a really strange thing. In other words, do bodies, meaning bodies of multiple people, have the freedom to sort of say things and establish things? Okay, and we think, well, that's a weird way to think, but your church does that. Your church has a statement of faith. Your church says this, we believe. There's a we statement. But oftentimes that's where tensions come, because what happens when the liberty of the body to sort of set the parameters conflicts with the liberty of an individual within that body to say something else, right? And a lot of the liberty conversations are trying to navigate the tension created by those two things. And one of the one of the deficiencies, I think, for us as Americans is that we've so accented that individual liberty question that the other one doesn't even make sense for us as a sort of big category. So like we really have to even just like wrap our minds around what would it mean for cities, states, nations to speak corporately and say, thus we believe, and therefore if you don't, sorry. Like, go to Rhode Island. Like that's like there's corporate liberty, individual liberty tension, and so I think that's a place where I'm just doing some fruitful kind of thinking as a kind of, and I would describe that as the if God does something amazing, I think that at least some of us, and I think this is why academics and pastors, theologians, one of our callings is to kind of look ahead, prepare for what if God does, right? So that when we're not caught flat-footed. But in the more near term, most people should just be faithful at your post. Like where'd God plant you, do the thing in front of you. That's what God's calling you to do. And if you're faithful over little, he'll put you over much.
So I would just say, I would add to like practically, okay, what can you do in this conversation? It's like, whenever we talk about the common good, that's not opposed to liberty, like in the Catholic small c thought, like they work together. Like to be fulfilled in your liberty is to also be contributing and participating in the common good. So it's not a totalitarian thing where it's an imposition upon you that just constricts your liberty, but it's a full-fledged understanding. But practically, okay, what do you do? I think we should not just be constantly talking about our rights, but also not abandoning our rights, because if you abandon your rights, you abandon the rights of others. Right. And so you have to also be thinking about how does the defensive right contribute to the welfare of all, and not just talking about like get off my lawn, just my liberty, but also not quickly abandoning liberty, because that's extremely dangerous for everybody.
Well, I have to say that the Catholic integralist, post-liberal guys, let's be clear, these are people who dislike American founding and dislike Protestantism. I mean, they're very hostile towards Protestantism, and they make a lot of very unfair critiques. And they never define what they mean by liberty, which they define as essentially a hyper-libertarian, libertinist conception, which is never the tradition of ordered liberty we would have had here in our country. If you go back not even that long in the past, there are lots of things that we would have just said, no, you can't do that. Right. There was like wide consensus on a lot of things. And so I think if you go back and look at the concept of liberty in America as it was actually conceived, lived, and implemented throughout the history of this country, I think you will find it is very different from what what people like Sohrab Ahmari and Patrick Deneen, who are very motivated to undermine the American political tradition with caricatures of liberalism. Blame it all on liberalism, or blame it all on the Enlightenment. It's sort of like blame it all on French postmodern philosophers, or blame it on, it's kind of like, where did it all go wrong? Liberalism. I just don't think we should be paying attention to what those guys are saying at all.
There was a work in the 1980s by Robert Bellah, Habits of the Heart, which analyzes 4 traditions of individualism in the United States. And 2 of them are supportive of the common good and 2 undermine it. And Bellah, in the book, identified Republican individualism and biblical individualism as traditional, historic American understandings of the individual. But that way of thinking, those ways of thinking have been in decline for a long time. And the forms of individualism that have been ascendant have been utilitarian in character and expressionist or expressivist. And those are the forms of individualism that pretty much run the show today. So it's a good book. It was a bestseller. It's one of those books that changed the world and everybody forgot about. There were a lot of books like that.
Tim Keller still cites it as one of his influences.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not surprised at that. It's a great book, though. So I dig it up.
I got to read this, okay? So talk about America not with the common good. Here is the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. there's a lot of what you would call common good in that. And I think it shows that our conception of that is very, very different than what the Sohrab Ahmaris and Patrick Deneen's and Gladden Pappins and Adrian Vermeules of this world would have us believe.
Don't worry, they're not going to win. I mean, America's not going to be a Catholic integralist country, and they know that. But what can we practically do? I think we can talk about those categories. So when you hear me talk about politics, it's the pursuit of justice. Justice is a participation in the common good. And so you don't have to even work out your whole theory of the common good. What are the particular categories that tend to be discussed in political theory that are related to the common good? Justice, peace, general welfare, and things. So don't worry so much about working out your theory. Promote the good things that don't just terminate on your individual expressionism.
Well, I think we should wrap it up. It's been a great day. Thank you, guys. It's been really, I think, enriching. All of your talks have been really helpful. I'm going to have Joseph come on up. We're going to come down, and Joseph's going to lead us in our closing hymn, and then we're going to pray and let you go where you need to go.